Please welcome, from eGain, James Hunt.
Thank you. Hello. So, I'm going to talk a little bit today about how our customers are leveraging eGain analytics to drive improvement and drive up customer experience across their entire customer engagement operations. I'll start with this quote. It's from the Dimension Data Global Benchmarking Survey for this year, their 20th, another 20th anniversary. It underlines the importance of using data to drive performance and develop a competitive edge. But they also found that still, even today, many people are flying blind when it comes to understanding what's happening within their operations and driving improvements there. And you have to ask why that is, because the idea of using data to understand performance and measure and manage is nothing new. In fact, you can go back to some of the earliest civilizations and the dawn of writing to see evidence that people were aware of this. I read an excellent book recently by a man named Stephen Stigler. It's called The 7 Pillars of Statistical Wisdom. It's a book about the history behind some of the core foundation ideas around statistics. That's the kind of book I'm into. But in it had this image, which I found extremely interesting. What this is, I don't know if looking at it, you can kind of get a sense of what it is. It's a table of data. If I add in the numbers should appear at this point. There we go. If I add in the numbers, it becomes a bit clearer as to what it is. So what it actually is it's basically a report of the productivity of 2 crops over a 3-year period. That top row is the total for each crop for each of 3 years. The next row is the total across both crops for each year. Then you've got the yearly totals, and at the bottom, you've got the total across the lot. If they'd had Excel in 3000 BC, which is when this came out, this is what it would have looked like, probably. So you can see that the crop that's represented by the kind of upside-down umbrella is demonstrating year-on-year growth, and the little dancing man with no head had a good couple of years, but is trending down in year 3. But pretty much that's a matrix report like you might see today. So if people were doing that 5,000 years ago, why are we struggling today? Well, certainly the tools we use for analysis have moved on a great deal since then, although some of us still use tablets. But the landscape for analysis has also moved on significantly. And perhaps nowhere is that more evident than in the area of omnichannel customer engagement. If you think about the connected customer and what they expect, I mean, we've already heard a bit about that today. They expect resolution at the first time of asking. They like to self-serve on the web or on their mobile device. And they like to interact at a time that's convenient for them. Now, the platforms for communication have moved on to address these types of challenges and meet the needs of these types of customers. But the challenge for measuring and managing those platforms has grown exponentially. So here, in true clickbaity style, are 5 reasons why I think that is. The first is that the infrastructure for customer contact is now much more complex. Typically, it's geographically dispersed. We've got virtualized platforms across many sites. We're dealing with a mixture of internal and external resources. And data is everywhere across there, and it's all segmented by different business hierarchies and structures. More channels means a lot more data, and it's more complex. The task of assembling and sequencing many, many millions of events that happen across different channels over time is difficult. We're dealing with different types of data now, both structured data like event records and call records, and unstructured data like the transcripts of a chat. And collecting that data together is one thing, but putting it into the hands of business users in a way that they can get value from it is entirely another. And those users have many different types of needs, from frontline supervisors who need a real-time snapshot of what's going on, what's happening with their agents, to the analyst who needs to slice and dice data to get to root cause, to executives who need high-level KPIs and trends at an enterprise level. And we can't forget compliance. So right now in Europe, there's a lot of frenetic activity as people get ready for next May the 18th, when the introduction of the GDPR legislation kicks in. And that's just the latest piece of personal data protection legislation that we need to think about when we're managing large volumes of customer data. So addressing these challenges is central to our analytics proposition. eGain Analytics is comprised of 4 modules and provides complete omni-channel analytics available from the cloud. There's digital analytics for email, chat, social, and virtual assistant, knowledge analytics for knowledge usage, whether it's via customers through self-service or it's used to guide agents, operational analytics for voice and IVR, and journey analytics, which really ties the whole 3 together, and that's where the customer side of the picture really comes to the fore. Data consolidation and collection is really central to the platform. The idea is, certainly in terms of the eGain product set, it's not a bolt-on or a silo, it's central to what we do. So we collect data from across the eGain suite, the voice platforms like Cisco and Avaya, customer interactions across the web, and extensible to other platforms as well. All this allows for a platform that allows business users to get access to the data they need in a single consolidated platform. And access is controlled by fine-grained access controls, so it's really easy to determine who gets to see what. There are a set of business-relevant KPIs that are available straight out of the box across the common areas of business focus of experience, cost control, revenue, and compliance. Those KPIs are exposed in a set of out-of-the-box reports and dashboards so people can get up and running really quickly. And when they need to move beyond that, then creating your own reports is a simple 6-step process. So business users can self-serve their own MI in minutes. And beyond that, if we need to extend the system further, then there are developer tools so we can bring in further sources to augment the data further. This is combined with the tools to manage and intervene, whether that's in the terms of tools to drive resolution or controls to manage resources, such as change and agent skill assignment. And it's not just people that we can empower with tools, but also other systems which can leverage the power of analytic data to drive their own decision-making. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we operationalize this capability. Obviously, the first step, as I've said, is to capture information. When deciding how and what to monitor to understand current performance and where we should act to make improvements, it's really important to align the KPIs that we choose to measure success with the top-line business goals. Now, it sounds like common sense to say that, but often, when you traverse an organization, you'll find that different measures of success are being used to determine, what constitutes a successful business outcome. We can use analytics then to identify where we can improve, make changes, and do things that will change the customer experience. I'm not talking necessarily about making big changes here either. If you were to do something like revamp a whole website, it's quite difficult to tell which bits of that worked and which didn't. So if we're going to make small, focused changes, those can soon add up and result in big benefits. And the good thing about small changes is it's easier to measure their impact. So we can be more agile about it, be more experimental. Once we've made those changes, then we can measure their effectiveness. So are they actually happening? Are they doing what we expected? Are they delivering the value that we expected to see in terms of improvements? And this kind of continuous improvement cycle, it's not a one-off project. It's something that we can do again and again to continue to drive improvement. So I just want to look at a couple of examples of what that might look like. The first one centers around an initiative to improve first contact resolution. So I've seen a number of customers have some good success with an iterative approach to build up and improve their first call resolution rates. In this example, tackling first issues with web self-service, issues around IVR self-service, and then focusing on FCR issues within the contact center itself. So there's incremental changes delivering a big benefit. So thinking about the first of those, in terms of web self-service, this is a journey analytics report, which is based on a financial website. And what it's showing is the loan application process. So on the left here, it's the start of the process where people start to sign up for a loan application. And in the top right, that represents a successful completion of the flow. And the arcs show the volumes. And the people who basically don't make it to that top right are the people who fail to successfully complete the process after initiating it. So we can see here in the middle, we've got people who had to come out of the process to look for information and go to online help to try and work out how to complete the loan application process. So what this tells us is that we're not seeing the kind of self-service performance that we'd like to see, so we can look at how we can improve matters there. So there are several ways that we can do this. One way to do that is to put some guidance in place so that people don't have to break out of the process to complete what they're trying to do. One way to do that is with a virtual assistant. So by using this kind of measurement and analysis around it, we can see the improvements that we get by putting the virtual assistants and the guidance in place. And I'm not sure if you can see the numbers, but basically what we can see here is by comparing the two different approaches and driving some customers down the virtual assistant path, we can see the improvement and the better results we get from doing that. So the next kind of self-service piece that we attack here is around the IVR and self-service in the IVR, and look for problems there that we can address to help people serve themselves. What this basically represents is a stack-ranked list of areas in the IVR where people have failed to have a successful self-service outcome. We can do that by filtering on particular categories that we're interested in. And measuring this kind of information from IVRs is typically pretty challenging because the information that comes out of IVRs is usually very high volume and there's a lot of noise there. Unless the application's been deliberately instrumented to provide good MI, and as somebody who used to write IVR applications, I can tell you that they very rarely are, it's very hard to get this level of clarity and focus in on particular areas of interest. So what we can see here is at the top level where the highest volume of transfer outs are, where people are transferring out to an agent because they were unable to complete the task at hand. In this case, trying to order a statement or get a statement readout. So we can focus our improvement attempts around that, and then we'll be able to see over time whether that improves or not. And the last example around this kind of FCR push is around focusing around FCR issues within the contact center itself. So this is kind of a typical high-level dashboard around FCR performance and FCR efficiency. It tells us a number of things, but FCR itself is quite difficult to capture information around. Because, I mean, for example, the perspective from an agent and a customer, as Ian said, around whether or not an issue is actually resolved can be quite different. So we use basically an inference-based approach to determine whether something is FCR or not, which has configurable business rules underpinning it. So our definition of FCR can align with that of the individual business. So what we see here on the left, the bar chart shows us how many calls are actually effective, how many took multiple attempts to resolve, and how many perhaps did not get resolved at all. So perhaps customers called in once or maybe multiple times, didn't get served, didn't call back at all. The heat map in the middle shows us a breakdown by the agent wrap code of the calls that generated repeat contacts. So we can see where the hotspots are for things that generate subsequent repeat calls. So we're working back to the root cause of what's driving FCR failures here. And we can break that down by agent, by team, so we can really see where there are training needs or hotspots for process issues. And on the bottom right, we can see the trends across the different call drivers for FCR. So what is the initial inquiry and what is the outcome? So with stuff like this and the stuff behind it, we can really start to see where the issues we have around FCR are and start to understand the many dimensions that are involved in them and what might constitute the root cause. So we can start to make improvements around that. The second example I wanted to look at was around using analytics as part of a knowledge deployment to drive a successful knowledge deployment. And we use that in a number of ways. One is to identify which might be the best access mechanism for deploying knowledge, determining where we can put guidance in place to help people self-serve, measuring the effectiveness of knowledge once it's rolled out. So are people able to use it? Are they getting benefits from it? Is it relevant? And is it having the expected impact on the KPIs that we're looking to affect with it? So one way we determine where might be best to use a different type of access method or the right access method for deploying knowledge is to profile calls and call types. So this is a typical way we might do that, is to look at things like the handle time, the wrap time, the percentage of transfers and holds that happen across different inquiry types in the contact center. If I overlay that with this, we can see how we break that out to create these types of call profiles that tell us perhaps what type of knowledge access method might work best in each scenario. So for calls that are generally low handle time, don't see much transfers, don't see much holds, they seem fairly simple, they're fairly transactional, something that might be appropriate for maybe a virtual assistant. The inverse of that, the high handle times, lots of hold times while agents scrabble for information and ask for assistance, plenty of transfers, they tend to be things that are more complex, that might benefit from guided help to guide the agent through the difficult process. And the longer calls, but which still seem otherwise relatively straightforward, they're probably informational, so a good candidate for self-service. The second example here is around where can we put knowledge in place and intervene within the customer journey to help avoid channel breakout. So this is an analysis that looks at, in terms of a website, what drives people to the contact us page to escalate. So we can see at the top level, it's the things that are the most, what we're basically seeing on the left is what happened just before somebody came to the contact us page. So that is basically where did the journey break down. And if we tackle the highest volume first, then basically we're getting the biggest bang for our buck by focusing on the areas where we've got the biggest problems. And finally, as I said, we want to measure the impact. Are we actually impacting the KPIs that we expect to impact when we roll out knowledge to support agents and drive self-service? So this is a typical dashboard we might use to do that. It tells us things like, is knowledge actually being used by agents on calls? And where it is used, is that driving transfers up or down? What's happening to hold times around those calls? What's happening to FCR? And we can combine that, if we have the information available, with customer sat metrics and voice of the customer metrics, so we can attribute the individual knowledge elements that are being used to the outcomes that we're seeing. So there's just two examples there of where we use analytics to understand what the current situation is, identify where we can intervene to make improvements, and measure the effectiveness of those improvements. It's difficult to really get it across in terms of a screenshot on the screen, but if you haven't been to the demo station to see this in action today, then I really would urge you to do so. Thank you very much.